The scream tore through the evening stillness of Eldorado Canyon, Nevada, and Frank Vickers was halfway to his feet before his whiskey glass hit the saloon table. Every man in the place froze, cards suspended mid-deal, conversations dying like snuffed candles. The sound came again, raw and terrified, from somewhere down the dusty Main Street. Frank was out the door before anyone else moved, his hand instinctively checking the Colt at his hip as his boots pounded the wooden planks of the boardwalk. The year was 1878, and Eldorado Canyon had seen its share of trouble. Nestled in the harsh Nevada desert where the Colorado River cut through red rock cliffs, the mining town attracted desperados and dreamers in equal measure. But that scream was something different. That was pure terror. Frank rounded the corner of the general store and nearly collided with a woman stumbling backward from three men who had her cornered against the building. Even in the fading light, he could see her dress was torn, her dark hair falling loose from its pins. The men were laughing, drunk from the sound of it, closing in on her like wolves on wounded prey. "That's enough," Frank said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who expected to be obeyed. He was tall, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of desert sage. At 28, he had the kind of presence that made smart men reconsider their choices. The largest of the three turned, swaying slightly. "This ain't your business, cowboy." "I'm making it my business. The lady clearly doesn't want your company." The woman's eyes met his, and Frank felt something shift in his chest. Even terrified, even with dirt smudging her cheek and fear making her breathing rapid, she was beautiful. But it was more than that. There was something in her gaze, a depth of pain that went beyond this moment's fear. "Run along, friend," the second man said, his hand dropping to his gun. "We found her first." Frank's expression didn't change, but his stance shifted slightly, the movement of a man who knew how to handle himself. "I'll say it once more. Walk away." The tension stretched like a drawn bowstring. Then the third man, apparently more sober than his companions, grabbed the big one's arm. "That's Frank Vickers. He's the one who faced down the Miller gang last year. Let's go." They went, muttering curses and threats that faded as they disappeared around the corner. Frank waited until he was sure they were gone before turning his full attention to the woman. She had pressed herself against the building's wall, her arms wrapped around herself, trembling. "You're safe now," he said gently, keeping his distance so she wouldn't feel threatened. "I'm Frank Vickers. I work at the Double R Ranch just outside town." She nodded but didn't speak. Now that he was closer, Frank could see she was younger than he'd first thought, probably around 22 or 23. Her dress, though torn and dusty, had been well made once. This was no saloon girl or miner's wife. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, Her voice was soft, refined, with an accent that spoke of education. "Eastern, maybe. Thank you. They came out of nowhere. I was just trying to find somewhere to stay for the night." "You just arrived in town," she nodded again, and that's when Frank noticed her hands. Even in the dim light, he could see the scars crossing her wrists, old but prominent. Without thinking, his eyes traveled to the tear in her sleeve, where more scars marked her forearm. She saw him looking and quickly pulled her sleeve down, shame coloring her features. "The boarding house is just down the street," Frank said, pretending he hadn't noticed. "Mrs. Henderson runs a respectable place. Let me walk you there." "I don't have much money," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Henderson has a kind heart. We'll figure something out." He offered his arm, careful to keep the gesture respectful. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked in silence for a minute before Frank said, "I didn't catch your name." Catherine Calloway." She paused, then added, "I came from Boston. I'm looking for work." Boston's a long way from Nevada. Yes. Something in that single word told Frank there was a story there, one that explained the scars and the fear that still lingered in her eyes. But he didn't push. Mrs. Henderson took one look at Catherine's state and immediately ushered her inside, shooting Frank a grateful look. "I'll see she's taken care of, Frank. Put it on my account," Frank said. "And if she needs work, send word to the ranch. Mrs. Davidson at the Double R might have something." He tipped his hat to Catherine, caught one more glimpse of those haunted eyes, and headed back into the night. He should have gone back to the saloon, finished his drink, played his hand of cards. Instead, he found himself walking to the livery stable where he'd left his horse, his mind full of questions about the woman with scars on her wrists and sorrow in her soul. The next morning dawned hot and clear, the way most mornings did in the Nevada desert. Frank was mending fence on the southern pasture when he saw the wagon approaching the ranch house. He recognized Mrs. Henderson's old mare pulling it, and sure enough, Catherine Calloway sat beside the boarding house owner on the driver's seat. Frank wiped the sweat from his forehead and started walking toward the house. By the time he arrived, Mrs. Davidson, the ranch owner's wife, was already talking to Catherine on the front porch. Mrs. Davidson was a formidable woman in her 50s, weathered by desert sun and hardship, but with a core of iron kindness that made her beloved in Eldorado Canyon. "Frank," she called when she spotted him. "Come here, boy. Mrs. Henderson brought this young lady out, says you vouched for her." "Yes, madam. This is Miss Catherine Calloway from Boston. She's looking for work." Mrs. Davidson's sharp eyes assessed Catherine, missing nothing. The girl stood straight despite her obvious nervousness, her hands clasped in front of her. She wore a different dress today, simple but clean, with long sleeves despite the heat. "Can you cook?" Mrs. Davidson asked. "Yes, madam, and I can clean, so keep accounts. I worked as a governess back east." "Why'd you leave?" The question hung in the air. Catherine's jaw tightened, and Frank saw her hands clench briefly before she answered. "Personal reasons, madam. I needed a fresh start." Mrs. Davidson nodded slowly. "We all got our reasons for things. Lord knows this territory is full of folks running from something. Long as you're honest and work hard, I don't need to know more than that. I could use help with the cooking and the house. My arthritis makes the work harder than it used to be. Room and board plus $15 a month. Start tomorrow if you're interested." The relief that washed over Catherine's face was palpable. "Yes, madam. Thank you. Thank you so much." After Mrs. Henderson left and Mrs. Davidson showed Catherine to the small room off the kitchen that would be hers, Frank found himself watching the house more than he watched the cattle. He told himself he was just being neighborly, making sure the new hire settled in all right. But the truth was, he couldn't get Catherine Calloway out of his mind. Over the next few weeks, Frank found excuses to be near the house at mealtimes. Catherine proved to be an excellent cook, transforming the ranch's plain fare into something special. She was quiet, though, keeping to herself, speaking only when spoken to. The other ranch hands noticed her, of course. A pretty woman was a rare sight this far out. But there was something about Catherine that kept their comments respectful, and their distance maintained. Frank noticed other things too. The way she always wore long sleeves, even when cooking over a hot stove in the sweltering kitchen. The way she flinched at sudden movements or loud noises. The sadness that seemed to cling to her like morning mist in a valley, never quite burning away even when she smiled. One evening, about a month after Catherine arrived, Frank was washing up at the pump behind the house when he heard voices from the kitchen window above him. Mrs. Davidson and Catherine were talking. "You don't have to hide those scars, child," Mrs. Davidson said gently. "Not here." "They're ugly," Catherine replied, her voice tight. "People stare. They judge. People who matter don't judge, and people who judge don't matter. Whatever happened to you, it's over now. You're safe here." There was a long pause before Catherine spoke again. "I was engaged to be married back in Boston. Charles Ashford, from a very prominent family. He seemed perfect at first. Charming, attentive, everything a woman could want. But he wasn't. No. After we were engaged, things changed. He became controlling, jealous, then angry. When I tried to break off the engagement, Her voice broke. "He locked me in his family's summer house, kept me there for 3 weeks. He said if he couldn't have me, no one would. He wanted to break me, make me so afraid that I'd never leave him." Frank's hands tightened on the pump handle, rage building in his chest. "How did you get away?" Mrs. Davidson asked. "His sister found out. She helped me escape, gave me money for the train. But Charles found us before I could leave. He had a knife. He said he'd mark me so everyone would know I belonged to him, so no one else would ever want me, sweet mercy. His sister fought him off, but not before. Not before he cut my arms, my shoulders. The doctor said I was lucky it wasn't worse. But Charles's family has power, influence. They made it all go away. Said I was hysterical, unstable. They tried to have me committed to an asylum, so I ran. I took what little money I had and came as far west as the trains would take me. I thought if I could just get far enough away, maybe I could start over. Maybe I could forget. And have you forgotten? No, I see him every time I close my eyes. I feel the knife every time I look at these scars. No man will ever want me now. I'm damaged, broken." "That's where you're wrong, child. The right man won't care about scars. He'll care about the woman underneath them." Frank moved away from the window quietly, his mind reeling. The rage he felt toward this Charles Ashford was unlike anything he'd experienced. But stronger than the rage was a fierce protectiveness toward Catherine, a desire to show her that she was wrong about herself, that those scars didn't define her worth. The next morning, Frank waited until Catherine came out to feed the chickens. She startled when she saw him sitting on the porch rail but didn't flee. "Morning, Miss Catherine," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Vickers." She still maintained such formality even after a month. "I was hoping you might take a walk with me after breakfast. There's something I'd like to show you." Suspicion and fear flickered across her face. "I have work to do." Mrs. Davidson already said it was fine. "Just an hour, please." Maybe it was the sincerity in his voice, or maybe she was just too tired to argue, but Catherine nodded. "All right, 1 hour." After breakfast, Frank led her away from the ranch house, toward a small canyon to the east. The morning was still relatively cool, the desert coming alive with the sounds of birds and insects. Catherine walked beside him silently, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth. "I overheard you and Mrs. Davidson last night," Frank said after a while. "I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I was at the pump." Catherine stopped walking, her face going pale. "Then you know what I am. I know what was done to you. That's different from what you are. Is it?" Her voice was bitter. "I'm scarred, ruined. No decent man would want me." Frank turned to face her fully. "May I see them?" "What? Your scars? May I see them?" "Why would you want to?" Tears welled in her eyes. "They're hideous. Because they're part of you. And nothing about you could be hideous." For a long moment, Catherine just stared at him. Then slowly her hands went to the buttons of her sleeve. She rolled up the fabric, revealing the network of scars that crossed her forearm, some thin, some wider, all healed but permanent. Her hands were shaking. Frank reached out and gently took her arm in his hands. Catherine tensed, ready to pull away, but he held her carefully, reverently. Then he did something that made her gasp. He lowered his head and pressed his lips to the scar on her wrist, tender and soft. "Mr. Vickers, what are you doing?" He moved to the next scar, kissing it just as gently. My name is Frank, and I'm showing you that these scars don't frighten me, they don't disgust me. They make me admire you more, because you survived something terrible and you're still here, still standing, still strong. I'm not strong, she whispered, but she didn't pull away as he kissed another scar, then another. You're the strongest woman I've ever met. You escaped a monster. You traveled across the country alone. You started over with nothing. That's not weakness, Catherine. That's courage. Tears were flowing freely down her face now. Frank released her arm and cupped her face in his hands, wiping the tears away with his thumbs. I know we haven't known each other long, and I know you've got no reason to trust a man after what that devil did to you. But I need you to know something. From the moment I saw you in that alley, terrified and alone, something in me recognized something in you. I can't explain it better than that. You matter, Catherine. You matter to me. Frank, I can't. I'm too broken. I have nightmares every night. Sometimes I can't breathe because I remember being locked in that room. I flinch when anyone raises their voice. I'm a mess. Then we'll work through it together. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm just asking you to let me show you that not all men are like Charles Ashford. Let me show you what you deserve. Catherine searched his face, looking for deception, for hidden motives. But Frank's sage green eyes held only honesty and a tenderness that made her heart ache. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to trust again. We'll take it slow as you need. I'm not going anywhere. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Frank smiled and took her hand, the one with the scars, and tucked it into the crook of his arm. They continued walking into the canyon, where he showed her a hidden spring surrounded by wildflowers, a secret oasis in the desert that few knew about. I found this place my first year working at the ranch, Frank said. When things get hard, I come here to think. I wanted you to know about it in case you ever need somewhere to escape to. It's beautiful, Catherine said, genuinely smiling for the first time since he'd met her. Thank you for sharing it with me. They sat by the spring, talking. Frank told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 17, about drifting west until he found work at the Double R. Catherine told him more about Boston, about her love of books and music, about the life she'd thought she'd have before everything fell apart. The hour stretched into 2, then 3. By the time they headed back to the ranch, something had shifted between them. Catherine's walls hadn't crumbled completely, but a door had opened, just a crack. Over the following weeks, Frank was patient. He never pushed, never demanded. He joined Catherine in the kitchen sometimes, helping her prepare meals, telling her stories that made her laugh. He'd bring her small gifts, a pretty rock from the canyon, a wildflower, once a book he'd ridden into town specially to buy because she'd mentioned missing having something to read. Catherine began to relax around him. She started seeking him out, asking his opinion on things, sharing her thoughts more freely. The other ranch hands noticed, teasing Frank good-naturedly about his courtship. Mrs. Davidson watched it all with approval, pleased to see Catherine coming back to life. But it wasn't all smooth progress. One evening, one of the newer ranch hands got drunk and grabbed Catherine's arm roughly, asking her to dance. She froze completely, her face going white, her breathing rapid and shallow. Frank intervened immediately, getting between them, but the damage was done. Catherine fled to her room and didn't come out for 2 days. Frank sat outside her door that first night, talking to her through the wood. I'm right here, Catherine. You don't have to talk to me. You don't have to come out. I just want you to know you're not alone. Go away, Frank, she said, her voice hollow. This is never going to work. I can't even handle someone touching my arm without falling apart. That man had no right to grab you like that. He's been let go, by the way, left this afternoon. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Catherine, healing isn't a straight line. You're going to have bad days, that's expected, but I'm not going anywhere. On the second day, he slipped a note under her door. It simply said, "Come to the spring when you're ready, I'll be waiting." She came at sunset. Frank was sitting by the water and he stood when he heard her approach. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying, but she was there. "I'm sorry," she said. "You have nothing to apologize for. I'm so tired of being afraid. I'm so tired of letting him still have power over me." Frank walked to her slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. When he was close enough, he held out his hand. "Then let's take it back. Your power. Let's take it back together." She put her hand in his and he drew her close, wrapping his arms around her. She stiffened initially, old instincts screaming at her to run. But Frank just held her, gentle but steady, and gradually she relaxed into the embrace. It was the first time she'd let a man hold her since Charles, and when she realized that, when she realized she felt safe instead of terrified, she started to cry. "That's it," Frank murmured, stroking her hair. "Let it out, I've got you." They stood there as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Catherine crying out months of pain and fear while Frank held her through it all. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back to look at him. "How are you so patient with me?" "Because you're worth it. Because what we have, what we're building, it's worth taking the time to do it right." "What do we have, Frank?" He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think we have something that could be really special if we let it. I'm falling in love with you, Catherine Calloway. Maybe I already have fallen. I love your strength, your kindness, your quick mind. I love the way you hum when you're cooking and don't realize you're doing it. I love how you're brave enough to keep fighting even when you're terrified. I love all of you, including these scars, because they're part of your story. They're proof that you survived." Frank, She couldn't finish the sentence, overwhelmed by emotion. "You don't have to say anything, I just needed you to know." But Catherine shook her head. "No, I want to say it. I'm falling in love with you too. It terrifies me because I never thought I could feel this way again. I never thought I'd trust anyone enough. But when I'm with you, I feel safe. I feel like maybe I could have a future that isn't defined by my past." Frank cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "May I kiss you?" Her heart hammered in her chest, but she nodded. Frank leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When his lips met hers, gentle and sweet, Catherine felt something break open inside her. This was nothing like the forced, possessive kisses Charles had subjected her to. This was tender, reverent, asking rather than taking. When they parted, both were breathing hard. Catherine laughed, a sound of pure joy that surprised them both. "I never thought a kiss could feel like that." "Like what?" "Like coming home." They returned to the ranch hand in hand, and from that night on, things changed. Catherine was still cautious, still had moments of fear and doubt, but Frank was there through all of it. He learned her triggers, learned when to give her space and when to hold her close. She learned to trust his steadiness, his unwavering support. 3 months after that evening at the spring, Frank asked Mrs. Davidson for permission to marry Catherine. The older woman laughed. "About time, boy. You've been mooning over her since the day she arrived. You have my blessing, but more importantly, do you have hers?" Frank planned to propose properly, but Catherine surprised him. They were at the spring again, their special place, when she rolled up her sleeves without prompting, showing him the scars that she'd hidden for so long. "I want to show you the others," she said quietly. "The ones on my shoulders, my back. I need you to see all of it before we go any further." Frank's throat tightened. "Catherine, you don't have to prove anything to me. I know, but I want to. I want there to be no secrets between us." She turned around and unbuttoned the back of her dress, letting it slip down to her waist. Frank's breath caught, not at the scars themselves, though they pained him to see, but at the courage it took for her to show him. The scars crisscrossed her shoulders and upper back, some shallow, some deeper, all evidence of Charles Ashford's cruelty. Frank pressed his lips to her shoulder, then moved across her back, kissing each scar he could reach, just as he had that first time with her wrists. Catherine trembled, but not from fear, from something else entirely. "You're beautiful," Frank said against her skin. "Every part of you." Catherine turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. "Marry me, Frank Vickers," he blinked in surprise. "I'm supposed to ask you that. Then ask me." He grinned and dropped to one knee right there beside the spring. "Catherine Calloway, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married a month later in the small church in Eldorado Canyon. Mrs. Davidson stood as Catherine's witness, beaming with pride. Half the town attended, drawn by curiosity about the quiet Eastern woman and the steady cowboy who'd won her heart. Catherine wore a cream-colored dress with long sleeves, but she no longer wore them to hide. She wore them because she liked them, and that made all the difference. During the ceremony, when the minister asked Frank to repeat his vows, Frank went off script. Taking both of Catherine's hands in his, he said, "I promise to love you in sickness and health, in good times and bad. I promise to be patient when you're struggling and to celebrate when you're strong. I promise to honor every part of you, scars included, because they're part of what makes you the incredible woman I love. I promise to make you feel safe, cherished, and valued every single day for the rest of our lives." There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Catherine's own vows were simpler but no less heartfelt. "I promise to trust you, even when it's hard. I promise to build a life with you, not in spite of my past, but incorporating the lessons it taught me. I promise to love you with everything I have, and to believe in the future we're creating together." Mrs. Davidson gave them a small house on the ranch property as a wedding gift. It had been empty for years, but with some work, it became a cozy home. Frank and Catherine threw themselves into making it theirs, painting walls, hanging curtains, filling it with small touches that reflected both of them. Their wedding night was gentle, patient. Frank understood that physical intimacy might be difficult for Catherine, given her trauma. He was prepared to wait as long as she needed, but Catherine surprised him again. "I want this," she said as they stood in their bedroom for the first time as husband and wife. "I want to create new memories to replace the bad ones. I want to know what it's like to be touched with love instead of violence, but I need you to be patient with me." "Always," Frank promised. He was true to his word. When Catherine froze or tensed, he stopped immediately, holding her, talking her through it. When she cried, he wiped away her tears and told her they had all the time in the world. And when, finally, she relaxed completely into his touch, when they came together fully as husband and wife, it was beautiful and healing in ways neither had expected. Afterward, Catherine traced the scars on her wrists, a habit she still had. Frank caught her hand and brought it to his lips. "Stop seeing them as marks of shame," he said. "Start seeing them as proof of your strength. You survived, Catherine. You're here. You're mine. Nothing can change that." Life settled into a rhythm. Frank worked the ranch, Catherine kept their home and helped Mrs. Davidson. They were happy, genuinely happy in a way Catherine had never thought possible. She still had nightmares sometimes, still had moments where the past overwhelmed her. But Frank was always there, steady as stone, reminding her that she was safe, that she was loved. A year into their marriage, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The news brought joy mixed with fear. She confessed to Frank one night, "What if I'm not a good mother? What if I'm too damaged to raise a child properly?" Frank pulled her close, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "You're going to be an amazing mother. Our child is going to be so loved, so cherished, and whatever challenges come, we'll face them together." The pregnancy was difficult. Catherine was sick for months, and her anxiety about childbirth, about becoming a mother, manifested in sleepless nights and moments of panic. Frank was patient through it all, holding her when she cried, encouraging her when she doubted herself. Mrs. Davidson, who had no children of her own, was over the moon at the prospect of a baby on the ranch. She helped Catherine prepare, sharing wisdom and reassurance. "You're stronger than you think, child. You survived what would have broken most people. You'll survive this too, and it'll bring you more joy than you can imagine." On a cold November evening in 1879, Catherine went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Frank stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. When she screamed, he bore it. When she cursed him for putting her through this, he took it with good humor. And when, finally, the baby emerged, a healthy boy with a powerful set of lungs, Frank cried. They named him Samuel Frank Vickers. He had Catherine's dark hair and Frank's green eyes, and from the moment Frank held him, he was utterly besotted. Catherine, exhausted but glowing, watched her husband with their son and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known possible. "Look what we made," she whispered. Frank leaned over and kissed her forehead. "You did all the hard work. He's perfect. You're perfect." Motherhood transformed Catherine. The focus required to care for an infant left less room for dwelling on the past. She was still cautious, still protective to the point of anxiety sometimes, but she was also fiercely loving. Watching her son grow, seeing him smile and laugh and explore the world with innocent wonder, helped heal parts of her she hadn't known were still wounded. Frank was a devoted father. He'd come in from working the ranch, dirty and tired, and immediately seek out his son. He'd hold Samuel for hours, talking to him about the horses, the cattle, the desert. As Samuel grew into a toddler, Frank taught him to ride, to care for animals, to respect the land. When Samuel was 2, Catherine became pregnant again. This time she was less afraid, more confident. The pregnancy was easier, and when their daughter was born in the spring of 1882, Catherine felt only joy. They named her Rose Marie, and she was the image of her mother, with the same delicate features and expressive eyes. Life was full, busy, and happy. The little house that had once seemed cozy now felt crowded with 2 children, so Frank and some of the ranch hands built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Catherine turned the original bedroom into a sitting room where she could read while the children played. The scars were still there, of course. They would always be there, but they had changed meaning for Catherine. When Samuel was 4, he asked about them one day, tracing the lines on her arm with his small finger. "Mama has marks," he said simply. Catherine glanced at Frank, who nodded encouragingly. She took a breath and said, "Yes, I do. I got them a long time ago before I met your father. Someone hurt me, and these marks are what's left. But they remind me that I was strong enough to get away, strong enough to start over. They remind me that I survived so I could have this life with you and your sister and your father. Do they hurt? Not anymore. Not when you touch them." Samuel kissed her wrist, mimicking what he'd seen his father do countless times. "All better." Catherine pulled her son into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, baby. All better." As the children grew, so did the ranch. Mr. Davidson, who had been ill for some time, passed away peacefully in 1884. He left the ranch to his wife, with the provision that Frank would manage it. It was a huge responsibility, but Frank was ready for it. He'd learned everything about running the operation over the years, and he had a gift for it. Catherine supported him fully, managing the household and the accounts while Frank oversaw the day-to-day operations. They were a team in every sense of the word. The ranch prospered under Frank's management, earning a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealings. One day in the summer of 1885, a man arrived in Eldorado Canyon asking questions about Catherine Vickers. He was a private investigator from Boston, hired by the Ashford family. Catherine's hands shook when Frank told her, old fears rising like ghosts. "They can't take me back," she said, her breathing rapid. "Frank, they can't make me go back." "No one is taking you anywhere," Frank said firmly. He called Sheriff Morrison, a friend and frequent visitor to the ranch, and together they met with the investigator. The man was professional, polite. He explained that Charles Ashford had died 2 years ago, drinking himself to death after a series of scandals. His sister, the one who had helped Catherine escape, had hired the investigator to find Catherine and make amends. "Miss Ashford wishes to apologize for her family's actions," the investigator said. "She's established a trust fund for Mrs. Vickers, a sum of $10,000 as recompense for the suffering her brother caused." Catherine, who insisted on being present despite her fear, listened with disbelief. "Charles is dead." "Yes, madam, has been for over 2 years. Miss Ashford wanted you to know that he can never hurt you again. She also wanted me to convey that she deeply regrets not doing more to protect you at the time." The money arrived a month later, along with a letter from Charles's sister, Elizabeth. She poured out her heart, apologizing for the family's actions, for believing Charles's lies, for not seeing the truth until it was almost too late. She praised Catherine's courage in escaping, in building a new life. She hoped the money might bring some comfort. Catherine cried when she read the letter, but they were healing tears. Knowing Charles was dead, truly gone, lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying. She wrote back to Elizabeth, forgiving her, telling her about her life in Nevada, about Frank and the children. The two women became correspondents and eventually friends, through letters that crossed the country. Frank and Catherine decided to use the money to expand the ranch and to establish a small school in Eldorado Canyon. Education was hard to come by in the territory, and Catherine wanted to give other children the opportunities she'd had. She taught at the school herself, 2 days a week, sharing her love of literature and learning with students who might otherwise never have access to books. The years passed peacefully. Samuel grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch and everything about it. Rose became a bright, spirited girl who shared her mother's love of books, but also her father's adventurous streak. In 1888, Catherine gave birth to another son, James, and 2 years later their final child, a daughter they named Lily. With 4 children, the house was always full of noise, laughter, and occasional chaos. Catherine, who had once thought herself too broken to deserve happiness, found herself living a life richer than any she'd imagined. The nightmares were rare now, the fear that had once dominated her life reduced to occasional shadows. One evening, when the children were all in bed and the house was quiet, Frank found Catherine sitting on the porch, looking out at the desert stars. He sat beside her, taking her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come. How different my life is from what I thought it would be. Happy different or sad different, incredibly happy different." She turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "You gave me back my life, Frank. You showed me that the scars didn't have to define me. That I could be loved, could love, could have a future." Frank brought her scarred wrist to his lips, kissing it tenderly as he had so many times before. "You gave me just as much. You taught me what real strength looks like, what courage means, Every day with you is a gift, Catherine. Even the hard days, especially the hard days, because they remind me how far you've come, how much you've overcome. I'm so proud of you." They sat together under the stars, hands intertwined, hearts joined. The desert night wrapped around them, warm and vast and full of possibility. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and stable. It was a good life, a blessed life. Catherine thought about the woman she'd been 7 years ago, arriving in Eldorado Canyon with nothing but fear and desperation. That woman had been certain her life was over, that she'd never know happiness or peace. She'd been so wrong. "Thank you," she whispered to Frank. "For what?" "For kissing every scar. For showing me that they were proof of survival, not marks of shame. For loving all of me, even the broken parts." "You're not broken, Catherine. You never were. You were wounded, yes, but you healed. And you're stronger for it." As 1890 approached, the Vickers family was thriving. The ranch was one of the most successful in the region. The school Catherine had helped establish was educating dozens of children. Their own 4 children were healthy and happy, growing up with the kind of security and love Catherine had once only dreamed of providing. Samuel, now 11, was already talking about running the ranch someday. Rose, at 8, had declared she wanted to be a teacher like her mother. James was a rambunctious 6-year-old who loved the horses more than anything. And Lily, the baby at just 2, was the darling of the entire ranch, spoiled by everyone. Mrs. Davidson, now in her late 60s, had stepped back from active management but still lived on the ranch in her own house. She watched the Vickers family with deep satisfaction, knowing she'd been right about Catherine from the start. The scared, scarred woman who'd arrived years ago had blossomed into a confident, capable, deeply loved wife and mother. One spring day in 1891, Catherine was working in her garden when a carriage arrived at the ranch. To her astonishment, Elizabeth Ashford stepped out. They'd been corresponding for years, but this was the first time they'd seen each other since Catherine fled Boston. Elizabeth was older, grayer, but her eyes were kind. She approached Catherine hesitantly. "I hope it's all right that I came. I wanted to see you, to see the life you've built." Catherine embraced her, old hurts forgotten. "Of course it's all right. You saved my life, Elizabeth. You gave me the chance to have all this." Elizabeth stayed for 2 weeks, becoming part of the family. She met the children, rode around the ranch with Frank, spent hours talking with Catherine. When she left, it was with promises to visit again and invitations for the Vickers family to come to Boston someday. "You did it," Elizabeth said as she prepared to leave. "You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something beautiful. I'm so proud of you, Catherine." After Elizabeth left, Catherine stood in the yard, watching the dust from the carriage settle. Frank came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You all right?" he asked. "Better than all right. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The years continued to be kind to the Vickers family. The ranch grew, the children grew, and the love between Frank and Catherine only deepened. They faced challenges, of course. Drought years, illness, the normal trials of raising children and running a business. But they faced everything together, their bond unshakable. Catherine never forgot where she'd come from, what she'd survived. But it no longer defined her. The scars were still there, fading with time but never disappearing. She wore them openly now, no longer hiding them under long sleeves in the heat. They were part of her story, but not the whole story. The whole story was about survival and healing. It was about finding love when she'd thought love was impossible. It was about building a family, a home, a life worth living. It was about a cowboy who'd looked at her scars and seen not damage but strength, who'd kissed everyone and showed her that she was worthy of love exactly as she was. When Samuel turned 16 in 1895, he officially became Frank's partner in running the ranch. It was a proud day for the whole family. Rose was preparing to attend a teaching college in San Francisco, determined to bring better education to the Nevada territory. James had discovered a talent for breaking horses, gentle and patient with even the most stubborn animals. And Lily, now 7, was showing signs of her mother's intelligence and her father's determination. Frank and Catherine, now in their 40s, had weathered and matured together like fine wine. Frank's hair was threaded with silver, his face more lined, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at Catherine. She had laugh lines now, marks from years of joy that far outnumbered the scars of suffering. Her dark hair had a few silver strands, but Frank thought she'd never been more beautiful. One evening, Frank took Catherine back to the spring where he'd first told her he loved her, where they'd shared so many important moments. The wildflowers were in bloom, painting the desert in brilliant colors. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Frank asked, settling beside her on the smooth rock overlooking the water. "Of course. I was still so scared, so sure I'd never be whole again." And now, Catherine smiled, that full, genuine smile that had taken years to develop. "Now I know I was never broken, just wounded, and wounds can heal." "With the right treatment," Frank added, taking her hand and pressing his lips to her wrist, right over the old scars. "With the right love," Catherine corrected. They sat together as the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them lay years of struggle and triumph, of pain overcome and joy discovered. Before them stretched years yet to come, grandchildren to meet, adventures to have, a life to continue building together. Catherine traced the scars on her arm absently, a gesture no longer rooted in shame but in remembrance. These marks had once represented the worst thing that ever happened to her. Now they represented survival, strength, and the journey that led her to this moment, to this man, to this life. "I love you," she said, leaning her head on Frank's shoulder. "Thank you for seeing past the scars." "I didn't see past them," Frank corrected gently. "I saw them exactly for what they were, proof that you survived, proof that you're strong enough to face anything. And I loved you more because of them, not in spite of them." "You kissed everyone," Catherine said softly, remembering, "and I'd do it again. Every single day for the rest of our lives." As darkness fell and the stars emerged, Frank and Catherine made their way back to the ranch house. Lights glowed in the windows, their children moving about inside. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of dinner. The horses whinnied in the corral, settling for the night. It was home in every sense of the word. The years that followed brought their share of joys and sorrows, as all lives do. Mrs. Davidson passed peacefully in 1898, leaving the ranch entirely to Frank and Catherine. They mourned her deeply, but celebrated the legacy she'd left, not just in property but in the example she'd set of kindness and strength. Rose became a teacher, just as she'd planned, returning to Eldorado Canyon to run the school her mother had helped establish. She married a kind geology professor who'd come to Nevada to study the desert rocks, and they gave Frank and Catherine their first grandchildren, twin girls born in 1902. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, combining the properties and creating one of the largest cattle operations in Nevada. He and his wife had 4 children who grew up riding and roping alongside their cousins. James, the horse whisperer, opened a training facility that became renowned throughout the territory. He never married, claiming the horses were all the family he needed, though he was a devoted uncle to his many nieces and nephews. Lily surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, traveling to San Francisco for medical school, and returning to practice in Eldorado Canyon. She saw her mother as her inspiration, a woman who'd overcome trauma to build a meaningful life, and she wanted to help others do the same. Frank and Catherine grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. The physical passion of their early years mellowed into something even more profound, a partnership of souls that needed no words to communicate. They could sit together in comfortable silence for hours or talk through the night, and both were equally satisfying. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1904, their children threw them a celebration that brought together nearly the entire town. Catherine stood beside Frank, surveying the crowd of friends, family, and neighbors who'd gathered to honor them, and marveled at how different this was from the life she'd imagined in Boston. "What would you say to that scared girl in the alley if you could talk to her now?" Frank asked, reading her thoughts as he so often did. Catherine considered the question. "I'd tell her that the worst thing that happened to her would lead to the best things, that the scars she was so ashamed of would become symbols of strength, that she'd find a man who'd love her not despite her damage, but because of her courage in surviving it. I'd tell her that happiness wasn't dead, just waiting for her to find it. And would she believe you? Probably not. But that's okay. She'd find out soon enough." Frank pulled her close, dancing with her to the music the ranch hands were playing. Catherine relaxed into his embrace, as comfortable in his arms now as she'd been nervous that first time. They moved together easily, naturally, the way people do when they've been partners for decades. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually, Frank and Catherine slipped away to their own home. It was much larger now than the small house they'd started with, expanded to accommodate their growing family over the years. But their bedroom was the same, the original room where they'd spent their wedding night, where they'd comforted each other through nightmares and celebrated joys. Catherine prepared for bed, removing the simple dress she'd worn for the party. She caught sight of herself in the mirror, seeing the scars that still marked her skin. They were faded now, pale lines against aging skin, but still visible. She no longer looked away. Frank came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Without a word, he began kissing her shoulder, moving across the scars on her back just as he had done countless times before. Catherine closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "Still beautiful," Frank murmured. "Still strong. Still the woman I fell in love with." "We're getting old," Catherine said, but she was smiling. "We're getting lucky," Frank corrected. "Not everyone gets this many years together. Not everyone finds this kind of love." They went to bed wrapped in each other's arms as they had every night for 25 years. Catherine drifted off to sleep feeling safe, loved, and whole. The nightmares that had plagued her early years were long gone, replaced by dreams of grandchildren playing in the yard, of the ranch thriving, of growing even older with Frank by her side. The new century brought changes to Eldorado Canyon and to Nevada. The territory was pushing for statehood, though it wouldn't achieve it until later. Automobiles began appearing on the streets alongside horses and wagons. The world was modernizing, but the Vickers ranch remained a constant, a piece of the Old West preserved. Frank eventually handed over most of the ranch operations to Samuel, though he still rode out most mornings to check on things. Catherine continued teaching at the school until her late 60s, finally retiring when her knees started giving her trouble. But she never stopped learning, reading every book she could get her hands on and discussing them with anyone who'd listen. Their love story became somewhat legendary in Eldorado Canyon. Young couples would seek out their advice, wanting to know the secret to such a lasting marriage. Catherine's answer was always the same. Find someone who loves all of you, scars included, and love them the same way back. In 1910, Frank and Catherine celebrated their 31st anniversary quietly, just the two of them at the spring that had always been their special place. They were both in their 60s now, slowed by age but still sharp in mind and devoted in heart. You ever regret it? Catherine asked as they sat by the water. Tying yourself to a damaged woman when you could have had anyone. Frank turned to look at her, his green eyes still as clear and honest as they'd been when he was young. Not for one single second. You were never damaged, Catherine. You were wounded, yes. But you healed. And even if you hadn't, even if you'd struggled every single day, I'd have stayed, because loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Catherine took his weathered hand in hers, tracing the veins and age spots the way she used to trace her scars. You saved me. We saved each other, Frank corrected. You taught me what real strength looks like, what courage means, how to be patient, how to be gentle, how to love someone through their worst moments and celebrate their best. You made me a better man, Catherine. I love you, she said simply. I love you too. Always have, always will. They sat together until the stars came out, two old souls who'd found each other at exactly the right moment, against all odds. The desert stretched around them, vast and ancient and beautiful, a fitting backdrop for a love that had proven just as enduring. Frank Vickers died peacefully in his sleep in 1914, at the age of 64. He'd been out checking cattle that morning despite Catherine's protests, had come home tired but happy, had fallen asleep in his chair after dinner, and simply never woke up. The doctor said his heart gave out, worn down by years of hard work and hard living. But Catherine knew different. Frank's heart had been strong right to the end. It had just decided it was time to rest. The grief nearly broke her. After 35 years of partnership, of waking beside Frank every morning and falling asleep in his arms every night, the emptiness was overwhelming. Her children rallied around her, taking turns staying at the house, making sure she ate, forcing her to keep going when all she wanted to do was give up. It was Rose who found her mother standing in the bedroom one night, running her fingers over the scars on her wrists, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, what are you doing?" Remembering, Catherine said. "Your father used to kiss these, every single one. He'd tell me they proved I was strong, that I'd survived. You are strong. You did survive. I don't feel strong right now. I feel like half of me is missing." Rose embraced her mother, holding her as Catherine had held her so many times when she was a child. "Then let us be strong for you. The way Daddy was strong for you when you needed it. That's what family does." Catherine slowly came back to herself over the following months. She would never fully recover from losing Frank. That kind of loss leaves a permanent mark. But she learned to live with it, the way she'd learned to live with her scars. Both were part of her story, proof of things survived. She moved through her days with purpose, helping with her grandchildren, still occasionally teaching at the school, maintaining the house and garden Frank had loved. She found comfort in the routines they'd shared, in the memories that filled every corner of the ranch. The Vickers children made sure their mother was never alone for long. They'd stop by daily, bring the grandchildren for visits, include her in all family decisions. Catherine appreciated their care, but she also needed solitude. In those quiet moments, she talked to Frank as if he were still there, updating him on the family on the ranch on her day. And sometimes in the evening, she'd roll up her sleeves and trace the scars on her arms, remembering the cowboy who'd kissed everyone, who'd shown her that marks of suffering could become badges of honor, who'd loved her so completely that even death couldn't diminish what they'd shared. Catherine lived another 12 years, dying in 1926 at the age of 70. She went peacefully, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Her last words were, "Tell Frank I'm coming," and those who were there swore she smiled as she said it, as if she could already see him waiting. They buried her next to Frank on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a headstone that read simply, Catherine Vickers, 1856–1926. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she survived, she thrived, she loved. On Frank's headstone beside hers, the family had added a new inscription. Frank Vickers, 1850–1914. He loved all of her, scars included. The Vickers Ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, and later under his children. The school Catherine helped establish still operates today, now named the Catherine Calloway Vickers Elementary School in her honor. The spring where Frank and Catherine shared so many important moments became a family landmark, visited by generations of Vickers descendants who grew up hearing the story of their great-grandparents' love. That story, of a scared woman who came to Nevada with scars she couldn't hide and the cowboy who kissed everyone, became part of Eldorado Canyon's history. It was told and retold, each generation adding their own understanding, but the core remained the same. True love sees past surface damage to the strength beneath. It doesn't demand perfection. It celebrates survival. It doesn't hide scars. It honors them as proof of battles won. Catherine's scars, once symbols of her deepest shame, became her legacy of strength. They proved that the worst things that happen to us don't have to define us, that healing is possible even from the deepest wounds. That love, real love, doesn't shy away from damage but embraces it as part of the whole person. And in Eldorado Canyon, Nevada, where the desert sun still beats down fierce and unforgiving, where the red rock cliffs still rise against brilliant blue skies, where the wind still whispers through the canyons, the story of Frank and Catherine lives on. A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones written on scarred skin and mended hearts, where cowboys kiss wounds and turn them into badges of honor, where survival becomes triumph, and where broken people find wholeness in each other's arms. The Vickers descendants still gather annually at the ranch, now a historical landmark. They picnic by the spring, tour the old house kept exactly as Frank and Catherine left it, and tell the story to the youngest generation. Because some stories need to be preserved, passed down, remembered. Stories of real love that overcame real obstacles. Stories that remind us healing is possible, that damage doesn't disqualify us from happiness, that the right person will love all of us, including our scars. In the end, that's what Catherine learned from Frank and what their story teaches still. We are more than our worst moments, more than what's been done to us, more than the scars we carry. We are survivors, fighters, people capable of incredible courage and capable of being loved, exactly as we are. Every scar tells a story, and some stories end with cowboys who kiss them all and prove that love conquers everything, even the deepest wounds carved into flesh and soul.